What you are about to see is the final installment in a three-part presentation. If you missed Part 1 and Part 2, you can find links to them in the YouTube video description area of this video. On the other hand, if you just need a quick recap of where we left off in Part 2, here goes. After going on about the rate of addiction in the gay and lesbian communities, a phenomenon that I had already previously explained in Part 1 is fully explicable by the nasty way that people like him treat the LGBT community, Mike Winger proceeds to criticize us for calling out homophobia and anti-LGBT discrimination with a bunch of arguments that at best are instances of the false analogy fallacy. Finally, he asserts that gay and lesbian couples are inferior because they cannot produce offsprings. I in turn respond by explaining how, given the size and trends of the current human population of the Earth, that is no excuse at all for treating gay and lesbian couples as being in any way of lesser importance. Which brings us to where I pick up in just a moment. Hello, Internet. This is Sophia, the Red Angel, doing my best effort on this channel to produce content that is worth your time to watch and listen to. And today I bring you the conclusion of my three-part response to Mike Winger's video titled The Secular Case Against Homosexuality, where Mr. Winger claims to present an actual secular case against homosexuality despite utterly failing to actually do so. As mentioned earlier, Part 2 included false cause argument, false analogies, and a call to protect society from a bogeyman threat of depopulation that is not actually there threatening us. But the biggest smear that he does against the LGBT community is saved for Part 3.
Also, it's inferior in raising children. And this is new information that we didn't have several years back.
Say what? This better not be from some crackpot source.
Children who are raised in a same-sex marriage or by a same-sex parent, they were analyzed in a study by a guy named Mark Regnerus from the University of Texas, Austin. And his study was published in Social Science Research. Try saying that 5 times fast.
And sure enough, it is. Why am I not surprised? Mark Regnerus' study is one of the most discredited studies that I have ever heard of. This presentation will be much longer than I intend for it to be if I explain everything that was wrong with that study. Instead, I will just drop a link to the Wikipedia article about it in this video's YouTube video description area and give you here just a few highlights. One clip from that Wikipedia article is as follows. Most notably, only 2 children in the study had actually lived with homosexually partnered parents for their entire childhoods. Many of the non-heterosexual parents were in previous heterosexual marriages and had then gone on to be in a same-sex relationship at some point. Regnerus removed the effects of divorce, infidelity, single parenthood from his heterosexual control group, but not from the gay parent group. Thus, negative outcomes could be attributed to family disruption and divorce as opposed to homosexual parenting. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. As I said, no time to explain everything. Link to Wikipedia in the description area.
These statistics are, they're well researched. It was carefully done. And there's amazing amount of hate coming out of certain groups against not only Regnerus, but anybody who quotes his stuff. And I guess I'll be next.
Again, it seems to me that it is anything but well researched. I mean, failure to account for confounding variables is already a fail in scientific research. And this amazing amount of hate that you talk about, way to put your Christian persecution fetish spin on the fact that people who cite heavily discredited studies as though they were fact actually get called out for doing so.
But can I say this? To endorse same-sex marriage is to endorse same-sex parenting. That makes sense, right?
Yes, and there is nothing wrong with that, given that you apparently had to resort to a thoroughly debunked study to suggest that there is.
This is why Catholic Charities Adoption Agency was forced to close their doors in 2006 after in Massachusetts they voted in same-sex marriage. They were forced to close their doors because the state said you can't refuse same-sex parents. You have to give kids to them too. And they said, we're just going to stop.
Well, while I see no value, at least no positive value, in having society's adoption agencies be church-based, I do value agencies that are good at finding homes for difficult-to-place children, as Catholic Charities, in fact, was good at. And for that reason, I will agree that the loss of the Catholic Charities Adoption Agency was a blow to the community. But is the gay lobby to be blamed for its demise? No. Catholic Charities shut its adoption agency down because the bishops were so determined to impose their anti-LGBT views that they were willing to sabotage Catholic Charities in order to do so. Once the bishops insisted that they would not allow Catholic Charities to adopt children out to same-sex couples anymore, the thing that made it a vital institution was done for, regardless of whether or not the state granted the exemption that would be needed for a shell of the agency's former self to continue operating. When the bishops in Massachusetts announced that they were going to seek an exemption to the state's rule against anti-LGBT discrimination, 7 members of the Board of Catholic Charities resigned. You can find a link to a New York Times article about it in this video's YouTube video description area. If you are not subscribed to the New York Times, then my sincere apologies for ramming you against a paywall. Again, these board members did not quit because of overbearing rules by the state of Massachusetts. They quit because the bishops were undermining the priority of the charity, which was to place children in homes, to which end they had already placed children with 13 same-sex couples. Apparently they figured that refusing same-sex couples just because they were same-sex couples was not just bad for compliance with state anti-discrimination laws. They apparently felt that it was also bad for the mission of the charity. So yes, Catholic Charities is among the victims here, but not victims of the gay rights lobby. They are victims of the church's own magisterium, who apparently felt that excluding gay people was more important than finding homes for children who need homes.
Later that year in San Francisco, another branch stopped their adoption services for the same reason.
Okay. Again, I find here a story of not the charity, but the church's magisterium having a problem with the anti-discrimination law. I will drop a link in this video's YouTube video description area to a page on a website that even seems to be against same-sex couples adopting, but that page still has enough information in it to show that this decision, once again, was not from the charities, but from the magisterium, and that the charities wanted to continue being open to same-sex couples seeking to adopt, because, unlike people in places of actual power in the church, they prioritized finding homes for kids who needed homes to be more important than sticking it to the gay and lesbian communities.
There's actually a growing number of children as adults now that this has been happening for long enough that some of them are adults, coming out and openly saying, and even starting organizations against allowing same-sex people to adopt.
Okay, I do not have enough time to check whether those organizations do in fact exist, so I will just grant Mr. Winger, for the sake of argument, that they do in fact exist, and that they are in fact what they claim to be, which is also a dubious claim. Again, I'm not actually trusting Mr. Winger to suddenly start giving accurate information here. I am merely granting him this for the sake of argument. But even if it is so, then what does that prove? Anecdotal evidence is considered the weakest form of evidence. Granted, that does not mean that anecdotal evidence is not evidence at all, but it means that sometimes people think that it proves more than it actually does. And at most, what the existence of these organizations proves is that there exist children who were raised by same-sex couples for whom things did not turn out so well. Does it prove that things would have been any better for these individuals had they been raised by the equivalent opposite-sex parents? No. Does it prove that the same-sex nature of the couples who raised them is the reason for whatever went wrong in their life? Whether it be dependence on welfare, having suffered inappropriate touching as a child, anything between, any combination thereof? No, it does not prove that either. All it proves, even if it is true, is that there exist adults who were raised by same-sex couples who ended up suffering these negative things in life. Frankly, considering the number of same-sex couples that there are raising children, and considering the percentage of children in general who suffer these misfortunes, it is unsurprising that at some point the Venn diagrams overlap. It is a statistical inevitability. Let us take the most horrific of these, for example, child sexual abuse. In this video's YouTube video description area, you can find a link to the Child Sexual Abuse Statistics page on the National Center for Victims of Crime website. It mentions a study that finds that 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 20 boys is a victim of child sexual abuse. You can also find a link in the video description area to a page on the Williams Institute website where it states that 114,000 same-sex couples are raising children in the United States. Now, that number may not have been as high in past years, but let us balance that out by also assuming that each of those couples is only raising 1 child. In other words, let us assume that there are only 114,000 children being raised by same-sex couples. Now, we know that the rate at which children are victims of sexual abuse is somewhere between 1 in 5 and 1 in 20. So if there are an equal amount of boys and girls total, that would mean that 1 child in 8 is a victim of sexual abuse. But since I am going for a low number estimate, so as to give the benefit of the doubt to my interlocutor's position, let's go with 1 in 20. That means that we would assume that if same-sex couples are as good or actually somewhat better than the general population at protecting their children, you would predict that there would still be 5,700 children of same-sex couples who would also be victims of sexual abuse. This number is much higher than what the existence of these organizations that Mr. Winger speaks about would prove. Of course, if a child suffers sexual abuse of any kind, that is terrible, no matter how rare it is. But for that to be a cause against allowing same-sex couples to adopt children, one would have to show that the same-sexedness of the couple in fact increases the child's risk of such ill fate, which once again Mr. Winger has failed to do.
So lastly, it redefines marriage in a devaluing and unjustified way. We don't have a good reason to change the view of morality and the view of society and go against the scripture.
If your case is to be deemed a secular case, then just doing what scripture says cannot be the default position. The burden of proof must be on you to show that the biblical rules should be followed.
Go against what's healthy for society and healthy for the individuals and all of the above.
You have utterly failed to show that there is anything unhealthy to society or to individuals about allowing same-sex couples to marry. Yes, allowing same-sex marriage does redefine marriage. I will not dispute that. But it is not a bad thing, nor is it the first time marriage was redefined. As a matter of fact, marriage as you know it is a product of a whole series of redefinings of the concept since the time of its earliest precursor that likely predates even the human genus. When polygamy was outlawed, marriage was redefined to mean one man and one woman instead of one man and any number of women. Centuries later, it was redefined again to mean one man and one woman in partnership instead of one man absorbing one woman in something called legal death. And that change was good because women should not be legally absorbed by their husbands. And then, in Loving versus Virginia, marriage was redefined again to mean one man and one woman of any combination of race, as opposed to one man and one woman of the same race. And religious conservatives were all up in arms against that redefining too, just as they are against the more recent redefining. They were wrong then, and y'all are wrong now. Redefining marriage to mean two committed adults of any combination of gender rather than one necessarily having to be a man and the other a woman is also a positive step in this evolution of marriage. It allows the benefits and responsibilities of marriage to be extended to people who previously were unjustly excluded from it. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this three-part presentation. I would like to thank the anonymous source that brought Mr. Winger's video to my attention and gave me a few of the points that I used in researching it. They asked not to be credited by name, so I am thanking them anonymously. And to all my audience, I hope that you enjoyed this three-part presentation. Please help my channel grow by liking, sharing, subscribing, ringing the bell, and leaving a comment in the comments area below. You can find in this video's YouTube video description area a link to my main links page, from which you can find my Discord and other resources of mine that I might add in the future. Also, if you would like to see updates on my channel that I am unable for now to give you on YouTube due to my current channel size, go visit my Ko-Fi page, which you can also find a link to in this video's YouTube video description area. My Ko-Fi page is also somewhere you can go if you wish to support my channel financially, because if you like my channel now, you should see what I will be able to do on this channel when its budget is no longer limited to whatever I can afford to siphon away from my personal living expenses. And until next time, see ya!